So, I wanted to talk today about who I am. And one of the things that occurred to me is that you may not know why it is that that was my topic. My feeling is that if you are a happy individual, you are attracting more of the same into your life. And therefore, I feel that that's the most valuable thing I can pass on. But finding your way to happiness sometimes is not as easy as it sounds. So that's why I thought I would explain a little bit about me, and perhaps then you can identify with why this was my mission. But I had a really big spiritual quest. And of course, the time when I grew up had a bearing because there was an awful lot of that sort of interest at the time. I wanted to find out for me, though, how I could understand it enough to do something with it that would help me. The last video that I created was on the law of attraction, and that had to do with my spiritual journey and how it ended up. And one of the things I knew for sure was that I wanted to be a writer, but I wasn't encouraged to be a writer. I also wanted to help people, and no doubt part of that was because I understood what it felt like for people not to be sure of themselves or to feel shortchanged. You felt like there was something more and that you didn't have that in your life. But I went about it in a kind of a methodical way. I did a lot of research and I discovered a lot of things that made sense to me, and that's why I put them all together the way I did. But while I was growing up, and just like everybody else, I ran into different obstacles, and I discovered an awful lot about myself, that I was very capable. And if I do say so myself, I was intelligent, so I knew how to find things that I needed. Things didn't always work out for me, just like with everybody else. I made mistakes. A larger portion of that happened because I was a person who, at a certain stage, didn't feel sure of myself. If I had not doubted myself, if I had stuck to my guns and believed in myself, I would have accomplished a few more things, I think, than I did. But in spite of all that, something just kept guiding me, and I was able to accomplish quite a bit. And sometimes I wondered how it all came about, but now that I understand the law of attraction, I know how that works. It's a it's what you're thinking about all the time, the things that interest you, that you pay attention to. Things were happening. For example, I wanted to write. I ended up in this small town in BC with my husband, and because I wanted to write, I thought, well, how about if I answer this ad? They were looking for an area correspondent, and I talked to the editor, and he was very nice to me, and we became friends and taught me an awful lot about writing, and in particular, writing for newspapers. It was very helpful for me. It also gave me courage because I found out I could write. And the things that needed correction, I could spend time working on those. I went from there to be like an area correspondent and then a feature writer for individual stories. I went around in town, the town I was living in at the time, and I interviewed different people for my stories, and I found I was kind of good at that. I always enjoyed talking to people. And so I was able to record our conversations and turn them into articles. This is something that I used throughout the rest of my life. Every little town that I ended up living in, and we did move around a bit. It was all in BC. I ended up writing for the newspaper there. And at one point, I ended up back in Vancouver just when Expo 86 was happening. I thought, well, gee, I'd love to be able to get there onto the site and see what that expo was all about. And how about if I use my experience to get to act as a correspondent for papers further up north. And so I was able to look around and see what it was all about, and that turned out really well. So while I was doing that, I was concentrating on helping people. So I was working for nonprofit organizations, and that started as a volunteer thing, and then it developed into full-time work, which is always precarious because if you plan on doing that sort of work, you're always depending on being able to get funding for the next year, so you never really knew from one year to the next if you'd be employed. But it was that kind of thing that I enjoyed. So I worked for a crisis line. I was a counselor and a trainer. We had 50 volunteers. It was really fascinating. And I learned a lot about myself. I learned, because it was mental health that was training us and helping us, about some of my own limitations that I hadn't allowed myself to address. And it helped me to be more confident and to see things clearly from then on. And then there were other things like I worked for I worked for a system. It was the legal system, and it was to do with first offenders. I had to find work in the community for them. It was called Community Work Service Officer. I did that for about a year. And there were other nonprofit things too that I worked for. I worked for in the school system as a teacher's aide. I learned sign language and worked for different contracts through mental health and one thing and another to work with kids in schools, and also through some of the services where they needed contracts for working with individuals. I worked with several autistic kids, which I found fascinating. And through all that, I was still writing. My interests also included things like learning how to, be a photographer in the sense that I took photos to go with my stories, and I enjoyed that sort of thing. I took up a little painting, and I began actually writing a book when I got to one town, which was a small village, and I ended up living there for about 20 odd years, and they had a history that went way back. So I wrote a history book. And this is the history of that town, plus another smaller town that was nearby that was really related to it, because that little place really wasn't a village, it was even smaller. But the two of them were connected because of the railroad, and they both had incredible histories. So I wrote about that. It was called The Associated History of Salmo and Weimar. And in order to get this book published, you needed the money to get the book printed. And it was fairly costly. And at the same time, I was trying where I wanted to help out the area. So I did. But in order to do this, to raise the money, I went door to door in that town in Salmo, and I asked for pre-orders, and I got them. I got enough to be able to print it, and some more beyond that afterwards. So I didn't make a fortune because I had to pay for the printing. But in the end, I got the book printed, and I went around to the different schools in the area and different libraries throughout the region, and they purchased them from me. But that was my first attempt at actually writing a book, and it took me 3 years. I was determined. I ended up getting a grant, and it was to get to the archives in order to get the information I needed to write the book. Some of the archives were in Nelson, some of them were in Trail, and so there's a fair distance between the two. It seemed like I spent a lot of the money on my gas. But that was something I enjoyed doing, and the town was very grateful as well. And then after that, I focused on different areas. I thought maybe something for kids, and computers were in and all that kind of thing. And I created these ebooks for kids. And my point of doing this was I thought kids, if you catch them early enough, you can teach them things that will help them for the rest of their lives. So my ebooks were geared towards kids 6 to 8, and they were meant to teach kids how to find courage to deal with their life and to figure out how to handle things. I ended up creating a website. Um, it's called Bedtime Stories 4, the number 4, and then the letter U.com. That is where I have all my ebooks. There's about 18 of them at this point. And so I encourage you, if you're interested and you want to help your kids to learn further in terms of courage, try these. And I found a lot of pleasure in doing that. I really enjoyed that. That allowed me to use not only my writing abilities, but my creative uh, aspects, like, for example, illustrating and that kind of thing. And now, of course, I'm doing videos. The thing is, the pervasive thing that has gone through my life is the idea that I can help people. But now, the reason I chose happiness as a topic for my videos was the fact that I was hunting for who I was and my value as a person. And I knew that I was basically a happy person, but I knew it would make me happier to find that out, because then I would know for sure my place in the world. That was the case. So it was important to me to create a channel where I could help again, but in a different level. So I hope you found that interesting. And if it helped you at all to understand me, that's great. And if you feel like buying any of my ebooks, I would appreciate it. And please sign up for my videos. I am encouraged to carry on, and your vote of support would be great. So thank you for that. Say thank you for watching. Bye-bye.